So we are now in chapter 6 of John, okay? And we are going to get through most of, Lord willing, chapter 6. We just finished, the other miracle that he was healing and Pool of Bethesda, and this. And now he goes for preparation for another miracle. And we're going to see how he absolutely feeds all these people. Speaking of feeding all these people, Kelly had a wonderful, invited a lot of her friends and people that she knows and wanted them to have a taste of Bible study. So I did a Bible study in her house on Sunday. And they had potluck. Oh, my word. Talk about feeding the 5,000. They could have probably done that with all the food that they had. So it was amazing. I spoke from Philippians. It was a real sweet and deep time with Jesus. It was great. So thank you for hosting that, Kelly. So now, let's open up to John 6. And we're going to see the fourth miracle that's going on here. And this is feeding of the 5,000. So let's read. After this, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias, and a huge crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was performing by healing the sick. So Jesus went up a mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, a Jewish festival, was near. Therefore, when Jesus looked up and noticed a huge crowd coming toward him, he asked Philip, "Where will we buy bread so these people can eat?" He asked this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, so they sat down. The men numbered about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, and after giving thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also with the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were full, he told his disciples, "Collect the leftovers so that nothing is wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces from the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This really is the prophet who is to come into the world." Therefore, when Jesus knew that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Okay, let's look at this, okay, because here Jesus, here's a crowd, always crowds gathered around Jesus, right? So we always had to withdraw, right? So a crowd is gathering near the Sea of Galilee, okay? And it was a time of the Passover, right? One of the feasts of the Jews, okay? And John is the only one of the 4 Gospels who told us it takes place during the Passover, okay? And so maybe this great multitude were a lot of Galilean pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem. Now, we know what the Passover is, right? Associated with Exodus, when they were the Exodus of leaving Egypt, right? And how God went before them and saved them, okay? And so now they're going to see this multitude not only with bread, but bread from heaven, right? Not only physical bread, but bread from heaven. So he goes up to Philip, one of the disciples, and he asks a question, which is a typical Jesus thing, right? He asks a question, and he's like, where are we going to buy this bread? I mean, there's like a lot of people out here, Philip. We got to feed them. They've been here a long time, right? And so what's happening is that in Mark, it tells us that they had been listening to Jesus all day. And so Jesus was concerned about feeding them, okay? And so he says to Philip, well, what are we going to do? We got to feed these people. Now, notice, he didn't ask Philip to fulfill that question. He asked Philip to test him. Isn't that so good? That's why he asks us questions, right? He asks us questions to test him. Because why? It says, for he himself knew what he would do. Well, of course he would. He's Jesus. Of course he would know what he was going to do, right? So he knew the miracle that he was about to perform, and he wanted this opportunity to teach his disciples. That's how he wants us to join him. He wants us always to have this readied heart, right? So we're teachable, so we're malleable, so we can be taught in and through these situations, right? Because it wasn't just about getting the job done. It wasn't just about feeding the multitude, okay? But it was about teaching his disciples along the way. Same thing with us. Same thing with us as followers of Jesus Christ. Now remember, Philip had seen many miracles that Jesus had done, right? He'd already seen many, many miracles, okay? So there should have been, no question to him about the resources that Jesus had, okay? And so, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient, he said. Well, yes, that's very true. So their problem was basically in two parts. First, they didn't have enough resources to buy the bread and to feed the multitude that is before them. And then secondly, even if they had the money, okay, it'd be impossible to purchase enough bread to feed them all. So it was two-part. Now, as I was studying this, I thought, isn't that how we go about stuff? We tend to logically look at this. And meanwhile, he's looking at it top down. I've got this done in the heavenlies already, Margot. And, it's not at all according to what you think it should be. I have this. Watch me work. Watch me work. Watch me do the miraculous. Watch right in the details of everything. Watch me work, right? And as I was thinking this, with greater faith and knowledge, Philip should have said something like, okay, I know you're my master. I know who you are, Lord, and everything. And I know that, we need to feed them. And I know you're greater than Moses. I know that you're greater than Moses, whom God used to what? Feed the multitude every single day in the wilderness with manna, right? With bread, okay? And you can absolutely do this just by speaking, just by making it so, just by walking through this. Or he could have thought, I know that you're greater than Elisha. And what Elisha did, God used to feed many sons of the prophets, right, with little food. I know that you're greater than that. And the scriptures say that we shouldn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of your mouth. So, I know you have enough to feed these multitudes. See, if Philip would have gone to his faith and what he knew already about Jesus, he wouldn't have been trying to use the logic. See, you need to go to him first. Right? It's the same thing. Well, if I do this. No. Go to him first. Just like we did in prayer and declare last week, right? You pray first. You pray first. You know him. You're in the word. You trust him. You know him, right? And so, Philip goes, well, 200, denarii worth of bread isn't even sufficient to feed them, okay? So Philip's knowledge of this was accurate. That was accurate and quite impressive because 200 denarii is 6 months of wages. But his knowledge was useless in getting this problem solved. Did you hear me? His knowledge was useless in getting the problem solved. Same with us. Our knowledge is useless with getting the problem solved when he already has this done in the heavenlies. Because see, Philip thought in terms of money. How much money would it take, to carry out God's work in this small way? And see, what we tend to do is we tend to limit God, right? Don't we do that? We put him in a little box. Put him in a box, and this is what you can do, okay? This is what you can do. This is what you can do, God. It's done in the smallest way. That's not what he calls us to do. Jesus wants us to take a completely different approach because you know what? He's going to provide in a big way. It's going to be through him. It's not going to be through us and our little bit of knowledge and what we think and how to apply that and everything. No, he's way beyond that. He's other. He's other. Here's what Spurgeon said. Philip was a man of figures. He believed in what could be put into tables and statistics. Yes, and like a great man and other people of his sort, he left out one small element in his calculation, and that was Jesus Christ. And so his answer went creeping along the low levels. He doesn't want us to be creeping along the low levels. You don't leave out one very important person, Jesus Christ, in figuring this out. And Philip was a matter-of-fact person, right? He was a person of business. He was a quick reckoner. He was more ready to rely on his own calculations than unseen resources. We're supposed to trust the what? The unseen. The unseen. And there's Jesus standing right in front of him. And he's telling him how he can't do this. And how are we going to do this? And everything. And Jesus is going like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. Just like the pool of Bethesda, right? Right? 38 years, he's laid there. I can't get in. Nobody rolls me in. Nobody takes me in. This. Jesus is like, look at me, look at me, look at me. Don't look at the pool, right? Now, Andrew comes along in verses 8 and 9. And Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, right? And he says, there's a lad here who has what? 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And then he says, but what are they among so many? Like all these people out here. I mean, what is that, right? Now, I love this because Andrew once again introduced someone to Jesus. Remember how he introduced Simon Peter? He's a guy that's always like, well, Jesus is here. Let's talk to Jesus about it, right? And so now he's like, well, this kid has his lunch. I'll bring it to you, okay? Now, barley loaves, just so you know, that was regarded as a simple food fit for animals. So this little guy was probably from a very poor family. And his mom sent it along with him, right? I just love how God takes like the least of these, right? And makes it the most. And when I was studying this, these cakes of barley and then the fish, the word isn't ictus, like used as like a fish. The word is, what was the word? I cannot remember the word. Oh, there it is, asperia. It's asperia, which means salted fish, which means it would be the kind of fish that my dad liked to eat sardines out of those. Do you remember that? Ooh, my mouth just salivated from that. Ooh. Oh, all right. He used to love that with like some saltine crackers. He would, and this is what they're talking about. So we're talking about teeny little sardines and barley loaves fit for animals. And Jesus is like, yep, give them to me. Give them to me. You guys, that's how it is in our lives. We come with a pittance. And he's like, oh, watch me work in your life. Watch me make you new. Watch this. Just give what you have to me, and I'll take that and make it all new. And it will continue to spread and spread and spread and spread and spread. And so there wasn't much to work with, right? But God doesn't need much. In fact, he doesn't need any help. But he likes to have human agents there so he can walk with them and through this, and they can learn in and through this, okay? A lot of times he deliberately restrains his work until he has our participation. He loves our participation. I mean, we're at Ladies still. In 2023, we are the motley crew here left as his disciples. Huh? How's it going? It's so good, right? We are motley crew with a great, big, big, big God, right? And so he wants our participation. Now, I want to just ask you a quick question here. Is there something he's waiting for you to completely trust him in so you can walk forward in action with him? It's very quiet in here. Give it over to him. Like, give it over to him now, right? Because remember, God is the main actor in your life. You're not. He's the main actor. He's the main actor, but he asks us to join him in what he's doing. How great is that? I mean, you guys, the disciples are going to be part of like another amazing miracle. Same with us. You don't want to miss out on that, do you? No, not at all. Daily, he's in the details. And so he deliberately, many times, restrains his work until we're on board with him because he wants our participation. Now, the 5,000 are now fed in verse 10, okay? Jesus says, look, make the people sit down. And there was a lot of grass in the place, and so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. Remember, it says men, so we've got women and children, so it's probably 10,000 or more. And so Jesus, I love this. He says to the disciples, tell them to sit down. He's in no panic. He's in no hurry. Jesus had a huge catering job to fulfill here, right? He had a huge one. I mean, I thought catering job for our wedding or their weddings, our kids' weddings, but oh no, this is a huge catering job to fulfill, okay? But he goes about his work in an orderly way, okay? And so he makes them sit down. I mean, I want you to enjoy the food. Sit down. Relate to one another. We're going to have fellowship here, right? And when I was thinking about this, think about Psalm 23. When Jesus here basically is fulfilling the role of the loving shepherd, where he makes us lie down in green pastures, right? Just be here. I've got this, right? And that psalm gives the picture of the Lord as a host, right? Serving a meal to his servant as a guest. He says, you prepare a table before me, right? And so you anoint my head with oil and my cup runneth over. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23, verses 5 and 6. And so they sat down. And then Jesus administered everything in an orderly way. Remember, though, they had to come under Jesus' order to receive Jesus' miraculous provision. Okay, if you left, you wouldn't have his miraculous provision. You needed to obey what he was saying, and then you receive his miraculous provision. See, not only do you receive it, but the ones who came under Jesus' order would soon be filled to the full, like overflowing. That's exactly what he tells us. We are to have life, and life what? To the full, abundant life. Just keep letting me be the Lord of your life. Let me be the master. So they're fed, okay? And remember, it says in verse 11, he took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to disciples, and disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. Now, he only had a few loaves of bread and a few fish, but if you notice this, he was determined to do what? Give the Father thanks for what he did have. Now remember, many around him are watching this, right? The disciples especially, okay? And so here's Jesus with this amazing, grateful heart to his Father, knowing what he's about to do in and through him and with him. And he has this amazing, grateful heart because he knows whom to thank, right? He knows whom to thank, okay? So it's for 5 little cakes and 2 fish, and Christ gives thanks to the Father, which quite frankly, if we used our own like human logic, that's a meager cause for praise, isn't it? With all these people sitting out there, right? But see, he knows the potential. He knows your potential. He knows my potential. He knows the potential, okay? Jesus knew what he could make of them. And Jesus knows what he can make of you. Jesus knows what he can make of me, okay? And therefore, he gave thanks of what they would presently accomplish, okay? Remember, we are becoming who we already are. Stuart Briscoe would always share that. Margot, we're becoming who we already are. And just like God loves us for what we are becoming. Christ gives thanks for these trifles because he saw how this would grow. How this would grow. So he takes the loaves and he distributes them to the disciples. So I don't know if you've ever gotten deep enough in this story. Think about this. The miracle resided in the hands of Jesus. The miracle resided in the hands of Jesus, not in the distribution. Little is much in his hands, right? Little is much in his hands. And so it's in the distribution, okay? A moment ago, that little lunch belonged to that lad. But now, it belongs to Christ. Way different. So Jesus takes the loaves. Now he has taken possession of them, and they are now his property. And now he's going to do what? He's going to distribute them. And the miracle is happening in Jesus' hands. See, the multiplication of this food was not done with fanfare. We're not told exactly how the multiplication happened. It seemed to have happened as Jesus broke the bread and fish in his hands and thanked the Father, and he then distributed them to the disciples. See, it wasn't the integral loaves or integral fishes that were multiplied. In other words, it wasn't like, oh, here's 5 loaves of bread, I'll make 5,000 loaves of bread. Boink. Did you see that? I mean, it wasn't like, here's a loaf, here's a loaf, here's a loaf. No, that's not what happened. It wasn't like here's 2 fish, and boink, there's 5,000 fish. No, that's not what he did. It was made in the broken portions of them. Jesus took the loaves, and he broke them, and he gave thanks, and he distributed to the disciples. And everyone ate and was filled, but they had no idea that this miracle was happening. Remember, the disciples did not do the miracle, but they got to be a part of that because they simply distributed the miraculous work that Jesus did, right? Just like, remember, water into wine? It was like, they got to distribute. Same thing here. Same thing here. Listen to what Spurgeon said. This is really important. Bread comes from grain, which has the power of multiplication and reproduction within itself. But when it is made into bread, the grain is crushed, making it dead. No one ever multiplied wheat by planting flour. Yet Jesus can bring life from death. He multiplied loaves of bread made from dead, crushed grain and from dead fish. That's Jesus, right? I mean, it's the same with us. What? We die to self and what? And we live in him. We die to self and we live in him, right? And so he distributed them to the disciples, and so he relied on the labor of the disciples to do this great miracle. It's what he loves to do. It's the same with us. He relies on us for the labor. Come on, you're in the world, go. Preach, love the people, pray for the Spirit to work, preach the word, love the people, pray for the Spirit to work, preach the word, love the people, right? Pray for the Spirit to work. I mean, that's how it works. Just go, just go. You guys, he could have created, just think about this. He's Jesus. He can do anything. He could have created bread and fish like in everybody's pocket or in everybody's bag. Like all of a sudden, boop, there it is. He could have done that. He could, but he didn't. Jesus deliberately chose a method that brought his disciples into the work. Same with us. We're a disciple of Jesus Christ, very cleverly disguised as what? A mom, a wife, a teacher, a this, whatever, right? And he brings us into the work. Still today, you know what it is? You know what he wants? He wants us to keep a readied heart. Just keep a readied heart. I mean, Jesus refused to miraculously make bread to to feed himself in the wilderness temptation. Remember that? Satan's like, hey, you're really hungry after 40 days fasting, right? You're going, he's like, turn this stone into bread. He's like, nope. But here, he does it for others, which he would not do for himself. And God's supply was extravagant. Extravagant, as much as they wanted. Extravagant. They must have been at the potluck at Kelly's. I'm telling you, as much as they wanted. Extravagant. All ate until they were completely satisfied. And you know what's really cool? Think about this little lad. Right, he brings from a poor family, his mom packs, he's going to be gone for the day and this and everything. And he wonderfully gives over his lunch. I mean, that's pretty faith-filled, right? Faith-filled, right? Isn't it? I mean, he gives his lunch away and it's like, Meanwhile, he gets to eat to the full. He gets to see, and he knows deep down inside, hey, that's my lunch. I give that to Jesus. Look what Jesus has done with my lunch, right? He broke it and thanked and distributed it. How amazing is that? Until they were completely satisfied, right? Wow. So the boy himself ended up with more than he started with. That's what happens when you give it all over to him. That's what happens. He multiplies it, right? I mean, it would have been an adequate lunch for himself, but he gave it to Jesus. And Jesus turned it into an all-you-can-eat buffet for that boy, right? Can you imagine him going home and telling his mom? How great is that? How amazing is that? You guys, generosity is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. It's not a percentage. It's not this. It's like, well, I can't give this. We only have that. It's a lifestyle. He was willing to share. Generosity is a lifestyle. So then in verses 12 and 13, now they're gathering up the rest of the fragments of the feast. And he says, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. So Jesus was extremely generous, giving everyone as much as they wanted. Now, this is a remarkable miracle and something that the disciples should have anticipated that Jesus would do such a thing. I mean, you're hanging around him for a long time. You would think that he would do such a thing, okay? Even though they didn't understand it or anticipate the miracle, Jesus still invited them to participate in it. Doesn't that give you hope? Doesn't that gives me hope, right? I didn't understand it. I really didn't participate in it. I sort of put a box around you, Jesus. And meanwhile, you are what? You are inviting me. Come on, Margot. Just participate in this. Just watch me do this. Just join me in what I'm doing. Just join me. This door is open. Just walk through that door. That's what he does with each of us, okay? And so they're the ones that got to distribute miraculously the multiplied bread and fish. Can you imagine what a joy that must have been? And then to tell a story. Then they get to tell a story. It's the same with us. Everybody has a story. Tell your story, right? Because without their work, no one would have been fed. Same with us. In other words, he calls us to do the same. Go and feed the sheep. Go and feed the sheep. You got the best story ever. Go and feed the sheep. I've got this. Don't try to think this out logically or do this. I got this. Right? Just go and feed the sheep. And so Jesus demonstrated to them the giving character of God. The same character that God desires to build within you and me. Proverbs 11:24 says this. There's one who scatters, yet increases more. And there's one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. So the bread was multiplied as it was what? As it was scattered, right? As it was distributed. So then Jesus, I love this. He goes, okay, now there's going to be fragments that remain because they're filled to the full and everything. So now we need to go and gather up the rest of that, so nothing is lost. Good stewards of his miracle. Are you following this? he demonstrates to us you need to be a good steward. You need to be a good steward. So Jesus was always generous, but never wasteful. Never wasteful. He wanted to make good use of everything, which should teach us that, right? To be a good steward. Now, the reaction then to the miracle happens in verse 14, where it was like, oh, this is Jesus, as the prophet predicted by Moses. So then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. So the way Jesus provided the bread for this multitude in the open air, like some kind of wilderness, right, reminded those men of what? How God worked through Moses to feed Israel with manna in the wilderness. It brought them back to that. And so they said, truly, truly, this is the prophet. So Moses predicted the coming of the prophet they expected. It says in Deuteronomy 18:15, the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, Yahweh God, personal name of God. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him you shall hear. So if the coming prophet was to be like Moses, it made sense that he would also feed the people miraculously as Moses did. And so the crowd was willing to support Jesus just as long as he gave them what they wanted. Does that sound familiar? Huh? Oh, that's good. That's exactly how I wanted that prayer answered, Jesus. Absolutely. That's exact. Hey, you're doing really, really well now, Jesus, right? Right? Like we're God telling him that this is what we want, right? And so we were very willing to follow him as long as Jesus was giving them what they wanted. What did they want? They wanted bread. They wanted bread. And I know it's really easy to like criticize them. I mean, how selfish is that? You follow him for what you want. Okay. We often love Jesus for what he gives us instead of for who he is. Right? Like, oh, yeah, and what a blessing that was. And what is it? Well, the blessing can also be in the sorrow. It can also be in the hardship. It can also be in the trial. Because he's working it all for our good and for his glory, right? That we're becoming conformed to the likeness of his Son. We need to love and obey him for simply who he is. He's my master. He's Lord. He's Adonai. He's God. He's God over everything. He's totally in control. I remember a really, really big day in my life when I was going through infertility. And our last baby had died, was stillborn at 5 months along in my womb. And I remember going to our bedroom and just flinging myself on the bed and crying and wrestling with the Lord and loving him and this and it, such a stillness came over me, such a peace came over me when I just gave it over to him and I said, Lord, you know, if we never have children, it's okay. I mean, that is a desire in my heart. It's what I want. But if we never have kids, it's all right because I know that you have your best for me. And I love you for who you are, not what you can give me. I can see that day like I'm there right now. It was a huge turning point in my life. I love you for who you are, Lord. And I just went into all different psalms and praising him and telling him how grateful that I was for just who he is in my life and how he saved me and how he initiated a love relationship with me and how I know that he has his best for me. And it wasn't loving him for what he could give me anymore. It was just because of who he is. That's where you need to stay. That's where you need to stay, Margot. Remember this? You love me for who I am, not for what I can give you. And this is what he's sharing with all this crowd. And even the disciples, it's like, you guys, it's not that I can give you all this. It's who I am. I want you to fall in love with who I am. Because I love you. I'm your Lord. I'm your Adonai. And I'm God. Meanwhile, they try to make him the earthly king. They tried to make Jesus the earthly king, okay? And they were going to take him by force, right? And so that's why he departed and he went up to the mountain alone, right? Because they were about to come and force him to make him king. King was a political title. And the crowd was willing to support Jesus because they wanted to use him to throw off the Roman oppression that they were under directly in Judea or indirectly through Herod Antipas in Greece. I'm so sorry. The Greeks in Galilee. So they wanted him as king, but they wanted him as a political king, okay? And then, so suddenly, there was this unusual man, Jesus, and he had miraculous powers, so he could do miraculous powers against the Roman oppression. So they want to have Jesus as the king, the political king, right? And so that's why he departed alone again to the mountain, okay? He wasn't suppressed or seduced by a crowd that was going to want to make him king. He departed, okay? He turned his back on the crowd and went to pray with his Father, to his Father. That's what he did. Because, why? Because Jesus was more interested in being with his Father than hearing the applause of the crowd. Let that sink in for a minute. He was more interested in being with his Father than hearing the applause of the crowd. Spurgeon says this, "He who is already king has come to open his kingdom to men. But in their blindness, men try to force him to be the kind of king they want. Thus, they fail to get the king they want and also lose the kingdom he offers." They want to be the political king. Meanwhile, they're losing out on the fact, I'm King of Kings. You need to look at me. I'm Jesus. So he goes from feeding the 5,000, departing, going up the mountain to be with his Father, to the next miracle where he walks on water. Okay, so let's go to verse 16. Yes, verse 16 of chapter 6. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. Darkness had already set in, but Jesus had not yet come to them. Then a high wind arose, and the sea began to churn. After they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea. He was coming near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I. Don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him on board, and at once the boat was at the shore where they were heading. All right, let's dig into this. So here's Jesus walking on water. The disciples, he goes up the mountain, right? And the disciples go out on the Sea of Galilee. And so Jesus tells them, look, you need to go and get in the boat, okay? And Matthew and Mark tell us that the same, the disciples were to go get in the boat. And they set off on the Sea of Galilee because that's what Jesus told them to do, okay? He told them, look, why don't you go and get into this boat, probably because he could see they were maybe being infected with the crowd's excitement, because now they want Jesus as king, political king. So he's probably asking him to leave, go get in the boat, and I'll meet you on the other side, okay? So it was already dark, which wasn't a big deal. A lot of these guys were fishermen. They were accustomed to being on the lake at night, okay? So they thought about rowing across the lake at night wasn't a big concern. And now Jesus comes to them. Okay, so remember? Now, this is the second time that Jesus comes to them when there's a problem on the boat, right? When they get a little scared on the boat. The first time on the stormy Sea of Galilee, Jesus was what? In the boat. And he was sleeping, right? And the disciples were like all upset. They were so upset. They're like, where's Jesus? He's like sleeping in the, we're going to die here in this. And Jesus like wakes up. Oh, yeah. Calm the sea. Right? I mean, you guys, you're not going down if Jesus is in the boat, just so you know. You're not going down. Where's your faith? You're not going down when Jesus is in the boat. Okay, so now he was present with him in the boat, and he rebuked and calmed the storm. This time, the winds turned, and there was a storm, and Jesus asked his disciples to what? To trust his unseen care and concern for him. This is trust the unseen. Like, I'm not in the boat, but I can still be trusted. And so, the wind arises, and they've been going, 3-4 miles, and it was churning, and the wind was bad enough, but it was whipping up the waters and making for troublesome seas. And the Sea of Galilee, by the way, is known for sudden, violent windstorms that like quickly make the lake dangerous. The Sea of Galilee is 600 feet below sea level. You know that, right? 600 feet below sea level, and it's like a cup-like depression. And so when cooler air rushes down over the hillside, what happens with the winds is it churns up the lake. It churns up the lake. It's like an eddy current, okay? And since the disciples are rowing toward Capernaum, they were heading into the wind. Consequently, they made very little progress. Okay, so here comes Jesus. Hey, guys. Right, he's walking on the water. Come on. Would you love that? He's walking on the water. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. Okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, and they were afraid. Okay, so in the first storm, they were terrified. They were terrified. At the beginning of the second storm, they were more frustrated, I think, than they were afraid. I mean, they'd been like doing this and not getting very far. And so Jesus told them, you remember, to look, just row across the lake before, they left. And despite their hard work, they were making little progress. So they weren't going anywhere. Okay, so this happened in the 4th watch of the night. So this is between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. And so they had been rowing hard for like 6 to 8 hours. Okay, and they had only come about halfway across the lake. So they were in a place of frustration at the will of Jesus. Just steep on that for a minute. They were at a place of frustration at the will of Jesus. They were doing exactly what he told them to do. Ever been there? Okay, but remember, he's always working. He's always working. Even when you can't feel it, he's working. Always when you can't see it, he's working. He's always working. Right? Jesus knew this. It's another thing, like, I want you to learn. I want you to trust me. This is another test. Let's go. Let's grow up. Let's grow that faith up, right? Right? And additionally, in Mark 6, it says that Jesus watched the disciples as they rowed across the lake. So his eyes were absolutely on them all the time, and they were in the will of Jesus and watched by Jesus, yet what? Working hard in frustration all the time. So they see Jesus walking on the sea, and now they're afraid. Okay, and Mark tells us, Mark 6, says the disciples were afraid because they thought Jesus walking on the water was a ghost or was a spirit. Okay, and at this point, if you notice, the disciples were not ready for any kind of supernatural help, which I find amazing. They have just seen miracle after miracle. They've just helped feed the 5,000 plus. And now they weren't expecting any supernatural help, okay? They knew what Jesus had commanded them to do. They set out to do it, but without any direct help from Jesus, okay? So they were surprised and they were afraid to see supernatural help coming to them. Why? He's always there. He's always a yelp away, right? He's right there. And Jesus gave them reasons and reminders to trust his supernatural help. I mean, you guys, I am sure that they took some of the 12 baskets that were left over. of the bread. It tells us that in John, right, verse 13. I'm sure that they took some of those in the boat. They were going to be in the boat and working, and they'd get hungry again, right? But they're shocked to see supernatural help for them on the sea. They're eating the very bread that Jesus broke miraculously. But now they don't expect any supernatural help. That's just like us. We look back and see how faithful he's been time and time and time and time. But now we try to we got to go through this, right? And we're frustrated and this. He's like, look here, look up. I've got the answer. I am the answer. It's always yes and amen in me. Come on, let's go. So the calming words of Jesus, what does he say? It's I. Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. So when he was close enough to announce, he announced his presence. Remember, he's walking on water. And he says, hey, guys. Hey. Jesus. Been with you for like years now. Okay, come on, right? I mean, how great is this? It's like, it is I, right? And so he was with his disciples and would meet them. He would meet them in their frustration and their fear. That's what he does. He comes to meet you in your frustration and your fear. He's always there, and then he meets you. He's like, it's me. It's me. I'm right here. I need you to look at me. I need you to look at me, right? I mean, I'm the God who is enough for this situation right now. So you can lay down your frustrations and don't be afraid. So Jesus came to bring supernatural help and comfort to his disciples. And his presence, just his presence, gave them what they needed. Same with us. Just his presence. That's why we practice his presence, right? All through the day. That's why you remind yourself, oh yeah, he's here now. He's here now. He's here now. His scripture comes back to me. That's it. That's who you are, Lord. That's who you are. Even though he came in an unexpected way. See, once again, we go, well, he could only work this way. Remember, they'd never seen him walk on the water yet. Like, right? How great is that? And so he came in an unexpected way. That's what he does with us. He comes in an unexpected way, right? And we know, John doesn't talk about it, but Matthew does. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, that after this, Peter asked Jesus, remember? Peter's like, hey, Jesus, if you can do that, hey, call me. I mean, I trust you. I can do it, right? Remember? So Jesus is like, come on. And what I love about this, you guys think about this. Everybody picks on poor Peter because, he took his eyes off Jesus and started going, and Jesus lifted him up. No. You know what the big deal is? Peter saw Jesus, trusted his presence, and at one point, he had to take his weight off the back foot that was in the boat and commit and put his front foot on the water. And he did. There's the big deal. And you know what? So he went down for a bit. Jesus is right there. He's right there. But he trusted him enough and he knew him enough. I'm gonna walk over this. None of the other disciples did. That's how we're to do it. I trust you, Lord. I'm gonna take that step. I trust you. Oh, you might go down a little bit. Oh, but he's got you. Oh, he's got you. It's always his presence. It's always his presence. So then Jesus, this is the best part of the story. He brings them to their final destination. Then they willingly received him into the boat. Well, no kidding. No kidding. You have been frustrated all night. You're not getting anywhere. You have at least 4 miles left to go across. And so they willingly received him into the boat. And here's the deal. And immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. No more of this. You know why? Jesus is in the boat. Jesus is in the boat. Right? He's in the boat. We're there. Didn't have to be logic. Didn't have to be work. Didn't have to be labor. Didn't have to be frustrated. Nope. We're there. We're there. Immediately the boat was on the land where they were going. So when they had willingly received him into the boat, the miraculous happened. Steep on that for a minute. When they willingly received him into the boat, the miraculous happened. You guys, this was a remarkable miracle. The work that was so frustrating, it was so frustrating a few moments before, now was divinely accomplished. Ever been through that? Have you ever seen how God's worked that way? That's how he works. That's who he is. Now it's divinely accomplished. I mean, you guys, it's like all of a sudden the boat is there, 4 miles. I wish I would have been in that boat. I don't know if it was like, zoop, or just like he thought it, and then all of a sudden there it is at land. I don't know what it was. But immediately, it was immediately, okay? Without sail, without an oar, in obedience to his will, so that without effort of the disciples, the next 4, there they were, the next 4 miles, there they were at the shore. First 4 miles, super frustrated. Jesus, done. That's who he is. It's already done in the heavenlies. Keep your eyes on me, he says. Keep your eyes on me. Jesus wants us to obey him. He wants us to work hard, okay? But he doesn't want us to work in futility. He doesn't want us to work in futility, okay? And so so their work in that boat, in rowing, it hadn't been a waste, okay? But it waited for the divine touch and power of Jesus. And that's how we're to walk. That's how we're to walk. Oh, it might be hard sometimes, it might be frustrating sometimes, it might be this. But when you keep your eyes on Jesus, even the interruptions of the day are divine. He's the one that goes before us. He's the one that takes us to the landing. He's the one that will bring us safely home. Because he's Jesus. Just think about the disciples thinking about this. Remember, Jesus left when everybody was trying to make him like king. Big time king, right? Political king. He's like, nope, 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 nope. And so he leaves, but he tells his disciples to get in the boat. And now he shows them another miracle. Comes on water, gets in the boat, immediately lands on the other side. And now even though he didn't claim a political king throne, the disciples are seeing him as King Messiah. They're seeing him, wow, this is Jesus, the Christ. Because remember, all the miracles were done because of deity. Jesus equals God. Jesus equals God. All the signs pointed to Jesus equals God. So there they are. And now he goes into talking about him being the bread of life. I'm going to begin on this. We'll end on that next week, and then we'll go into chapter 7. But let's begin on how Jesus is the bread of life and see what happens in verse 22. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the other side of the sea knew there had been only one boat. They also knew that Jesus had not boarded the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone off alone. They were pretty good stalkers, weren't they? Right? They were following him. Some boats from Tiberias came near the place where they ate the bread after the Lord gave thanks. When the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "I assure you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. Don't work for the food that perishes, but for the food that lasts for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal of approval on him." "What can we do to perform the works of God?" they asked. Jesus replied, "This is the work of God, that you believe in the one he has sent." All right, so now get the picture. The crowd follows Jesus and his disciples to Capernaum, right? Remember, the disciples left overnight. Jesus walks on water. Now the boat's over there, and now they're like, okay, we gotta keep following this guy. We gotta keep following this guy. So there were some boats that were there that had come from Tiberias, so they probably got in some of those boats, and then others walked. Okay, so they noticed that, Jesus wasn't there anymore. The guy who fed the 5,000, the miraculous, where did he go? They wondered where they went, and they saw that the disciples had left in a boat, but Jesus didn't leave with them. So they were sort of confused. I mean, they were usually with Jesus, right? And so these are the same people that were from the crowd that he had already fed, and so they wanted to keep being fed. So he responds to them, their first question, when he says, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Right? And so I love when he goes, well, what I should say, he didn't answer that question. He didn't answer that question. If he would have answered that question, he would have said something like, I walked over the Sea of Galilee at night, to help my disciples. They were getting a little scared and a little frustrated. And then I miraculously transported our boat across the remaining distance of the sea, and that's when and how I came here. No, he didn't say that. He didn't say that, okay? What he did, instead of telling them how he came, he told them why he came and why they came. That's more important, right? Why they came. Because they wanted the food that's miraculously provided by Jesus. It's what they wanted. It's what they wanted. So if you go through the Gospels especially, we can learn more from understanding the reason that we ask God a question than from the answer to the question itself, right? Jesus is like, I'm understanding why you're asking that question. Getting a little hungry again, huh? Yeah. You want some more of that miraculous bread, fish? Okay. So this was the case of those who followed Jesus around Galilee and asked the question. They wanted the bread. But more than just the bread, they also wanted the display of the miraculous, right? They wanted the experiential, And that miracle king then to lead them against who? Against the Roman oppressors. If anybody can do it, this guy can. They wanted to make him politically the king, And so they were quite unaffected by the wisdom of his words and the beauty of his deeds. But the miracle of food met their wants. That's what happens, right? And so there's this excited but impure enthusiasm. Oh, they're excited about him, but for all the wrong reasons. And we can tend to do that as well. And so those asking the question of Jesus went to a lot of trouble to find him and to follow him, Yet they were finding him for food that perishes. It perishes. Things that will fill your stomach and the earthly kingdom, which will perish as well, Jesus wanted them to labor for food that will endure forever and ever and ever and ever, that leads to everlasting life. So Jesus made a contrast between material things here and spiritual things, And so think about this. It is so universally true that people are more attracted to material things than spiritual things. Right? Oh yeah, you guys, you put up a sign that says free money. You put up a thing that says free food, right? If this is, you put up, people are there. And if you were to, put up things that says, let's talk about spiritual things, or let's talk about spiritual fulfillment, how you can be fulfilled spiritually. And let's talk about eternal life. Crickets. They're with the free money and the free food. And that's just what they were doing with Jesus. That's what the Son of Man, quote unquote, will give you. He says, they were rightly impressed with the miracle of the bread worked through Jesus, but Jesus wanted them to be more impressed for the spiritual food he brings by a miracle. This is just for now. It's going to pass away. This is forever and ever and ever and ever. And if you notice, he uses the word Son of Man. He's Son of Man. He didn't use Messiah. He didn't use Son of God. Because you know why? Because that would appeal to their militant kind of aspirations to make him king. To make him king. And so he calls himself Son of Man. Okay? And he says, because God the Father has set his seal on him. Meaning Jesus, okay? So a seal was a mark of ownership. It was a guarantee of contents. And you should be absolutely confident in Jesus because God the Father has guaranteed him. Because God the Father has set his seal on him. This is my son, in whom I'm well pleased. And that seal is on that. This is what Spurgeon says. As a person who wishes to communicate his mind to another who is at a distance writes a letter, seals it with his own seal, and sends it directed to the person for whom it was written. So Christ, who lay in the bosom of the Father, came to interpret the divine will to man, bearing the image, superscription, and seal of God, in the immaculate holiness of his nature, unsullied truth of his doctrine, and in the astonishing evidence of his miracles. I have God's seal. I have God's seal. That's who I am. And so Jesus answers their second question when they say, well, what shall we do that we may work the works of God, right? Well, what shall we do, right? And Jesus is like, look, don't labor for food that perishes. Don't labor for that, right? When they said, well, how should we labor for this? He's like, you're laboring for the wrong food, okay? And they're like, well, just tell us. Just tell us what we need to do. In other words, so we can get what we want from you. And he's like, you want my miracle bread. And you want me to be your miracle king. And you're just wanting to know how you can go about getting that from me. And see, they thought that pleasing God is found in the right formula for performing works that will please God. And many of us think that today. That it's all in the rules or in the doing this instead of relationship. Instead of relationship. And so Jesus goes on to tell them, no, you have to believe in him who he sent. That would be me. That would be me. And so next week we're going to go on to see how that faith is the foundation for works that truly please God. And he goes and he shares how that looks. And then we're going to go into chapter 7. And so now, the story gets deeper. They keep setting him up. They keep setting him up. They keep setting him up as he walks forward to the cross. So let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for for another day that we have been awakened by you, not only physically, but spiritually. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your word that will go deep into us, Lord, and may you change our hearts once again this very day. May those miracles that we are recalling and seeing remind us that you are the same yesterday, today, and forever, and you are constantly working. Even when we don't see it or feel it, you are always, always working. So may we always give you praise for who you are. Lord, thank you for just the sweet time of of seeing how the disciples respond and seeing how the 5,000 plus respond and seeing how you see their hearts and how you absolutely want your best for them, Lord. And that's what you want for us right now. And so help us walk through the rest of this week, knowing you more, loving you more. Give us opportunities to share the good news of Jesus, because it's the best news ever in our world that needs to hear. So thank you that you've already gone before us, that you make our path straight, and that we get to just join you in what you're doing. In Jesus' name I pray. Everybody said? Amen, amen, amen.